10. Kapololi. Hungry. From that first day on Molokai, hunger chased me over the peninsula. It sent me to the ocean in search of fish and pushed me into the forest to scrounge for roots and berries. I was excited to find callow patches in one of the valleys behind Kalawao. But then I learned they belonged to people who were not part of the settlement. The people were willing to sell their callow roots to leprosy patients. But their dogs would not allow us to steal from them. Back on my island, we shared whatever we had with our neighbors. If a man needed a shirt, his friend would run home to get one. If a woman and her children were hungry, they simply went next door to eat poi. And if anyone, a friend or a stranger, needed a place to sleep, we were quick to offer our houses. "Let my little clump of grass be yours," we would say. But here, on Molokai, our needs were too great. From the beginning, I had to learn new ways to survive. So I taught myself the location of each hut and learned which of the residents lived in caves. When they hobbled to the stream for water or searched the peninsula for fuel, I invaded their homes for what little food or clothing I could find. I knew how wrong this was. But stealing was the only way I could survive. The shirt I was able to take was too small. I tore new holes in it so the owner wouldn't recognize it and take it back. After my first day here I began to build a shelter but gave up when someone else invaded it and took a blanket I had stolen. I decided then to collect no more than I could carry. I moved about the settlement like one of Hawaii's legendary little people. According to our stories, the Menehune live in the mountains and come to the lowlands only at night. These short, hairy people work together to do good deeds for us, like building a wall or making a fish pond. They complete their task in one night and then disappear. Only a few of our people have ever seen them. I wondered if the Menehune had built the many low walls that crisscrossed this peninsula. Maybe the stone walls had been enclosures for growing food. Or boundaries between neighbors in a long ago time. I tried to imagine the people who had lived here. Had they worked and played and fished and feasted together? I saw that even now many of the people in this place stayed together for protection and helped each other out. Kiona was one of them. She was the old woman who had rescued the little girl from Albert on the day I arrived. She and a group of friends looked after each other in true Hawaiian style. I watched Kiona and the little girl when I traveled near their thatched hut. But I was careful not to let them or anyone else see the things I was doing or where I was sleeping. I often slept on the leeward side of a rock wall or beneath a shelter made with key branches from the forest. And if it rained all night, I hardly slept at all. Sometimes when the rains came I crawled under one of the houses in Kalawao. Of course, I had to be careful in the village. I did not want Boki and his helpers to see me there. But still I watched what went on in that place. There was a Luna who worked for the Board of Health and tried to keep order. His house was enclosed in a dirty white fence along with a hospital and other buildings. There was even a jail, and on rainy nights I longed to sleep in that tiny building. At other times I was afraid the Luna would put me there for stealing. Aloy and other young boys lived in one of the houses inside that fence. Another house overflowed with girls who desperately needed protection from Bad Albert, the octopus who'd tried to take the little girl at the landing place. Albert had his tentacles wrapped around every woman or girl who didn't have someone to look after her. And he didn't mind sharing them with other men in exchange for some key root beer or a dip in their poi calabash. There was even a schoolhouse in that picket enclosure. The teacher was one of the leprosy patients. But I did not see how anyone could learn reading or geography in this place, or why they would even want to. Food was the only thing that mattered here. And clothing and protection, and medicine. The settlement had a hospital but no doctor to care for the sick. The Luna's wife did what she could, but mostly the patients lay on filthy mats waiting to die. I knew from the newspaper stories my mother had read that foreign doctors occasionally visited the settlement. But most were afraid to touch anyone who had leprosy, and none of them stayed. We cared for ourselves as best we could, trying Hawaii's plant remedies for our sores. And some of the Christians who lived here would go into the hospital and pray for very sick patients. There were no real churches in Kalawao, but there was an American missionary, the Reverend Forbes, who came from over the Pali once in a while. He'd preach to believers of the Protestant faith. Mormons lived here too, and they had a priest who stayed in the settlement. But his real reason for coming was as kokwa to help his wife, who had leprosy. And as far as I could tell, there was no one to preach to the Catholics. One day I heard several Catholics sitting on their porch discussing this problem. "We should sign a petition," one of them said. "We should ask the bishop to send a father to us." I heard this because I was hiding beneath the porch, waiting for my chance to steal eggs from the chickens in their enclosed yard. We mostly had to find or grow our own food. But the Luna kept some cows, and one day some of the men helped him butcher a few of them. They distributed the meat to the patients, but it was gone before I decided to get in line. The people took the meat to their huts, and the odors of it cooking drifted out their windows. I didn't know if I wanted to run away or move closer. Either way, the smell of food made my belly hurt. I noticed that Kiona and the little girl were eating with some friends behind one of the clapboard houses. The sight of them eating together made a tightness in my chest that ached almost as badly as the pain in my belly. I had to get away from there, so I walked toward the sea. I sat on a black boulder and breathed in the smell of the ocean. The roar of the waves dashing against the rocks and the feel of the salty mist in my face made the food and the people in Kalawao feel very far away. Tears stung my eyes as I thought of my family eating roasted pig and telling stories while we ate. I remembered how Kimmy would snuggle under my arm and giggle in my ear, and how my mother would massage my shoulders while she talked. I hadn't been touched since the day I came here, when the one-eyed Boki gripped my shoulder and offered to adopt me. Many times I wondered if I should have gone to live with him. It would have been so much easier if I'd had others to help me survive on Molokai. And in some ways I guess I did have others. At least there was Aloy, who'd arrived on the boat with me. We never spoke to each other, but I watched him coming and going. And I learned in those first weeks that he was like a lizard hiding between the rocks, seeing everything that happened at Kalawao and reporting it to whoever would listen. Early one morning, not long after coming to Molokai, I awoke to the sound of Aloy's voice. Sail ho! It's boat day. I'd passed the night in a corner where two stone walls came together. I waited until Aloy was safely past me. Then I stood and looked out toward the ocean. The fog was so dense that I couldn't see a boat in the water. But still, I began walking toward the landing place. Waves of mist hovered white in the air about me, gently stroking my face. Ahead of me I saw a few thatched huts, their sagging lines softened by the fog. They looked almost beautiful at this time of day before sunlight revealed how moldy and ragged they were. They looked almost like homes in Honolulu. Maybe I'm dreaming this, I thought. Perhaps I'm not on Molokai. Maybe there's not a steamer in the bay. After all, I cannot see it. But then I did see it, the hateful little steamer that brought me here. Like other Hawaiians, I'd always loved the steamers because they traveled between the islands. A steamer was supposed to take Kameka and me to visit the big volcano. Instead, it brought me alone to this place. I needed that steamer. It was the only way I could get the supplies my mother had promised to send. When I thought about my mother's parcel, I walked faster. What if some thief got to it before I did? By the time I reached the landing place, a small crowd had begun to gather. The healthiest patients and those who had a kokwa to carry them got there first. The helpers and even some of the stronger patients carried neighbors whose feet were crippled. Kiona was there with the little girl. The two of them sat on the rocks and waited to see what the boat would bring. I saw Boki and Albert scurrying up and down the ledge, lending their help to new arrivals. I stayed away from them, but as far as I could tell they were too busy scheming to even notice me. The Luna had brought his oxen with a cart attached. When the sailors unloaded cargo, they handed him wooden crates and large bundles of pounded callow roots. A few of the patients helped pile them onto his ox cart. If people tried to take something that didn't belong to them, the Luna threatened to put them in his jail. But I noticed that Albert, Boki, and a few others managed to escape his notice. Or did the Luna just pretend not to see? I watched for a package with my name. I was so intent on finding it that I was startled when a voice spoke into my ear. So today you come for your government allowance? This is a good thing. Without your rations, you are skinny like a bamboo stick. Rations? I jerked my head around to see who had spoken. It was Aloy, the annoying one. He jabbed his finger at me. Remember when we came here? Why did you run away? The Luna sent someone after you, but you did not stop. So he gave your poi to someone else. Too bad for you. Poi? Food rations. Did you think they shipped us here and forgot us? Asked Aloy. They must send food. The poi is sour. The rice has bugs. But rotten food is better than stolen food. Don't you think so? I did not like the way Aloy emphasized stolen. But his news about government rations bothered me more. How foolish I had been. If I hadn't fled on that first day here, I wouldn't have lost my bundle to a pig and my shirt to a thief. I could have gotten food before looking for a place to sleep. I knew I must not make such a mistake again. And so, after I found a crate from my mother, I joined the others outside the superintendent's shack. Aloy was right. The callow roots the boss handed me were not fresh, and the rice was ridden with moths, but still it was food. My mother had sent matches, soap, and tinned meat. And a letter. As hungry as I was for the food, I was even more starved for my mother's words. So I hurried away from the crowd that gathered around the Luna's hut. For some reason I went to the lone hollow tree at the edge of the village. I settled myself on the ground and leaned against its trunk. Then I unfolded the paper. My dear child. We think of you every day. Yellow Cat reminds Kimmy of you. She holds on to him all the time. I am sure that when she goes to school she will want to take him with her. I worry over you. I don't sleep because I don't know if you are sleeping. I don't eat because I think you are hungry. There is no reason to smile now. Lonnie and Tutu try to make me laugh, but I cannot. Please write to me and tell me that you found someone to live with. We will always be your true family, but now someone else must adopt you. Aloha nui loa from your mother. There were letters from Lonnie and Tutu also. And a wilted hibiscus blossom from Kimmy. There was nothing from Kameka. I buried my face in the letter, hoping to breathe in the smell of home. Trying to recall the look of my mother's face. But her smile had disappeared, and without her smile I could not see her at all. I looked to the ocean and imagined swimming all the way to Honolulu. That would put the sunshine back into my mother's face. I thought how she would squawk at the sight of me. She'd pull me from the waves and hold my face in her hands and laugh and weep all over it. She would call for Kimmy and for Kameka and his family too. Then we would all run to the hills, where the sheriff would never find us. But I knew that swimming to Honolulu was impossible. Still, I sat on the side of that worn-out volcano and dreamed I could do it. I started thinking that if I couldn't swim there perhaps I could climb the Pali. After I reached the top, I could cross the island and board a steamer bound for Honolulu. And if they didn't allow me to buy passage? Well, then, at least I could find a place to hide on the top side of Molokai. I looked to the great green cliffs and wondered about life at the top. I didn't know anyone who lived there, but I was sure that beyond those cliffs were sunny villages with friendly Hawaiian people. I'd seen Mr. Meyer, the administrator who worked for the Board of Health. He was a man with very little hair on the top of his head but plenty of it growing on his face. He lived at the top of the Pali and came over the trail to check on the settlement from time to time. I knew the trail was dangerous. But I'd climbed many cliffs and I began to dream about climbing this one. If Mr. Meyer caught me he would probably have me thrown in the settlement jail. But what did I care? I was in prison already, shut away in this lonely place with no one to know whether I lived or died. I could not survive this way for long. I kept reading and rereading that letter from my mother. I carried it wherever I went. Then one day, when I was drinking from a forest stream, it fell into the water. As I watched my mother's words slide into a blur, I felt that I was losing her all over again. So I began searching the place in the distance where the ocean met the sky, watching for a steamer to come with another letter. But before the boat returned, I got sick. My nose ran, my head ached, and I coughed all night long. The sickness made me desperate to escape. I left in the darkness of an early morning. Almost immediately the Pali trail grew steep and then treacherous. In some spots it was completely washed out. Piles of sticks had collected in places where the trail should have been. When daylight came I saw that I was leaving a trail of blood on the path. I examined my feet and found new sores in the numb areas behind my toes. Although I did not feel pain, I knew that I needed to protect my feet. I wrapped my handkerchief around the worst sores. When I looked back to see how far I'd come, I was astonished to see how small the peninsula was. I had the feeling that if I kept climbing I could make it disappear completely. I turned and pushed upward. I climbed steadily for a while. But then a fit of coughing came over me. It grabbed me by the throat and wouldn't let go. I clung to a small tree and coughed until my chest ached. I peered through the leaves of the tree I hung onto. I saw nothing but blue beyond those leaves, the pale blue of the sky and the deep color of the sea. I could not see the peninsula anymore. I was relieved to leave it behind me. But my legs were wobbly now, and I was weak and hungry. If I lost my balance I could easily fall and hit my head. I was determined not to die while climbing this Pali. I turned to see the tops of those cliffs. And when I did, I saw what I did not want to admit. I was too sick to reach them. This was what the Board of Health had counted on all along. They had picked the perfect place to imprison us. I made one more start up the trail, but when the coughing set in again, I accepted their verdict. I turned and began the long journey back to the leprosy village. And I just kept thinking as I forced myself down that hill, I am doomed to live there for the rest of my life.